Welcome to the D2 Baseball Podcast with Robert Fry and Will Connerly. We're your ultimate source for Division II baseball updates, stats, information, scores, news, and more. Whether you're a player, coach, or passionate fan, we've got you covered with in-depth analysis and the latest updates from around D2 baseball. Join us as we dive into D2 baseball with exclusive interviews featuring top coaches and players, expert insights, and all the information you need to stay ahead of the game. Follow us on X and Instagram at DIVII Baseball for updates, highlights, and more. Enjoy the show. Welcome into the D2 Baseball Podcast, your go-to podcast for everything D2 baseball. I'm Will Connerly. He is Robert Fry, and today we're excited to talk about our All-American selections. We posted those a couple of weeks back, but Robert, we're going to break it down further right here on this comprehensive episode for our first team, as you see on the screen now, second and third, along with, hey, maybe some other guys that we considered but maybe didn't make the cut. But Robert, first of all, glad to be on here with you. Another opportunity to talk D2 baseball here with the launch of this podcast. And, well, welcome you to the program, and briefly tell us all about what the All-American selections mean to you and overall their significance here for Division II baseball, Robert.
Yeah, that's right. And we're excited to showcase it. You know, for those new to the concept, All-American selections highlight the top players here in Division II baseball and recognizing their outstanding performance and contributions that they've had throughout the season. And, well, you know, we have a bit of, we went a lot back and forth here selecting the three teams, and we made it, kind of custom to us. You know, some publications might have three starters rotation-wise, four starters. Some publications might have three or four outfielders. But we decided five because, well, the more guys we can highlight, the more we can bring light to Division II baseball and just the amount of quality players here in D2 across the board, across every team and every conference. And we're really excited to talk about that. But, Will, back to you. Talk a little bit about the selection process. What did we do going back and forth in terms of, how we decided, who should be first team, who should be second team, so on and so forth?
For sure. And I think that, like you said, when you're an All-American, that is the highest of high honors you can really get on the baseball field in Division II baseball. Not to say that we're the authority, but we did put a lot of time and dedication into picking these teams, as many people do. And so these selections certainly hold a lot of significance. And yeah, I think that's a great way to start an overview of the selection process for us, man. I think that, and we both can offer our 2 cents on this, but we were looking at a wide range of factors. We looked at obviously your statistics, but I think that even further than that, one thing that I like to look at as well is the impact that you made on your particular team. Also, one quality that maybe you couldn't quantify as much, but something that I at least considered a lot when we went back and forth. We had these long back and forths about this, was the leadership ability that you had on your particular team. And then also another factor I think that can be quantified, and we looked at quite a bit, and it kind of is telltale through stats, but consistency was something that I looked at as well. Those were some of the biggest things that I looked at when we were making our selection process for the 2024 season. How about you, Robert?
Yeah, me being a statistical guy and understanding, the amount of varied statistics that we look at, some key metrics, some key indicators of, success at the plate, on the mound, so on and so forth. Looking at those and seeing, hey, which ones stand out. And we'll talk a little bit about, why did this person stand out? Because I know it's very typical to look at average home runs and RBIs for a hitter. And we definitely looked at that, but we also encapsulate more stats just beyond that for that player. Usually, when you have a great of those three, yeah, that usually means you're too well. But again, part of it too factors in is, the team you play on. Maybe there is a really good hitter that just didn't have very many RBI opportunities. There
Mhm.
may be a really good hitter that just played in a very big ballpark and just didn't have many opportunities to hit home runs. So we look
Mhm.
beyond that and, talk about all these different kinds of stats. And obviously, another thing is like base running. We factor in a little bit of base running here too, because
Mhm.
that's equally as important. Not only for these guys that can not only get on base either via the walk or a single, but then essentially turn it into a double by stealing second base or so on and so forth. So we looked a lot into it, and we're excited to talk about it. And you know especially guys who played well, and most of the guys on these lists were in the postseason. And Will,
Yeah.
like what, I know we mentioned some of that, but what are something else that we had that allowed you to, or allowed us to kind of make these decisions?
Absolutely. And to at least close out this open and get into our selections as you see on the screen now, I think that is a huge point, right? Our first year doing this, and excited to continue to look at all these great players in Division II baseball. It's a lot of fun for us. And when you have a lot of great players that you line up against each other, for me, I think the thing that probably was the X factor, right? A lot of these guys had home runs and RBIs and great OPS. And you brought up a couple of other factors, base running. I think players who showed versatility, well-rounded players, that was very important to me. What do you do with the glove? What do you do with the bat? Like you said, all 5 tools showcased. And then also those who performed well when it mattered the most. And I know not everybody has that opportunity in the postseason, but when we talk about some guys that played really well in the postseason, I think that the high-stake games, how you perform in those types of games, those are huge. And then the other factor, especially when guys were really close, and I think this was big for pitchers, I looked at the strength of the opponents that they faced as well. I think that is pretty important to showcase how good you are as a ball player. And we have enough data now to know the strength of certain opponents and the strength of certain team schedules as well. So I'm excited to get into it, Robert. Position by position breakdown. Let's start with this first team that you see on the screen right now. And let's start with the pitchers, the starting pitchers, Robert. Those are the guys who get the ball to begin the game. And our starting pitchers on our first team, Brent Francisco from East Stroudsburg, Skyler Gonzalez from Tampa, Alex Mycutt from Millersville, Cole Gaiman from Missouri Southern, and Luke Lashuka from St. Leo. Those were our 5 starting pitchers. First team All-Americans on our end. All of these guys headlined their pitching staffs and had unbelievable numbers, Robert. When we looked and broke this down, there were a lot of really good arms, but these guys felt like they were cut from a different fabric, so to speak, and had some really, really good stuff as well. They met the eye test, and these are some of the as good as it gets in terms of starting pitchers, all Bulldogs as well in Division II baseball.
Yeah, like you mentioned, all Bulldogs, all guys who average a little over 6 innings a start per start. So very exciting there. All of them with an ERA under 3. You have Mycutt and Francisco with ERAs under 2. But ultimately, again, this is no particular order. I know we also mentioned that Skyler Gonzalez was our pitcher of the year, having a 2.46 ERA and a 16-0 record when playing in the toughest conference in Division II baseball based on overall talent ratings. And even if you want to look at things like RPI and strength of schedule, the Sunshine State Conference is the toughest. So being able to go in, week out, and be successful there, Skyler Gonzalez is pretty darn good. Again, with that 2.46 ERA, you have Cole Gaiman, who had a 2.25 ERA, maybe was overlooked a little bit in terms of, win-loss record. Because, again, we don't just focus on those things. Like, Connor Wolf was a guy that we did have some back and forth with, where Connor Wolf was sitting at 12-0. However, he had a 4.05 ERA. Cole Gaiman had a 2.25 ERA. And, he was able to get a lot of batters out, 90 strikeouts in 100 innings. Connor Wolf, 97 2/3 innings. We'll talk a little bit more about him later. But having these guys on here, and then Luke Lashutka, he had a nearly 30 inning scoreless streak to start the 2024 campaign, and that was impressive. And we thought, hey, how long can he continue this? He ultimately finished with a 2.88 ERA, but still nonetheless impressive. Again, pitching in that Sunshine State Conference. So exciting to see all these guys pitch. I mean, if you took these 5 guys and made a rotation out of it, this would be one of the best rotations, not just in Division II, in my opinion, and be all of college baseball, having these guys on here. So, Will, do you have any additional starting pitcher thoughts for these guys?
Yes, I think that when you look at how you break it down and you group these guys together in the way we have, they all are teams who made the postseason. No surprise, right, that a first-team All-American starting pitcher is a postseason team. Now, it's not a requirement that we looked at, but I just think it showed that, hey, if you have a guy who's going to put together a sub-3, a solid whip, and give you a lot of innings, you're probably going to win a lot of Friday and or Saturday games in some of these cases. And if you're going to win a lot of those games, you're going to be a part of a staff that's pretty impressive. I mean, you look at Skyler Gonzalez, he had a number 2 in his staff that was great. Alex, the Millersville rotation was great. St. Leo had a great rotation. And Brent Francisco and what East Stroudsburg did is great. Cole Gaiman fronted that staff, but they had a couple of other really good arms as well. All of these guys were really impressive. The strike, though, they all limited walks at a really high level also, and I think that was a key indicator to just having success. That in itself is a successful metric to look at, but also it just shows that all the other numbers come into place when you can be competitive in the zone, as all these guys were. But yeah, that kind of wraps up my thoughts on our starters. Let's go to the relief pitchers. I think, Robert, when I looked at any position in particular for our first team, or really for any team, not going to say it was easy, but this felt like, at least to both of us, this was one of the more clear-cut selections when we selected James Sashin out of Point Loma and Dylan Beck from Young Harris for the 2 reliever spots for our first team.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, James Sashin set the Point Loma record, Pac West record, so on and so forth for saves. He had 18 saves as the closer for Point Loma in 30 appearances. And yeah, like he had a 2.9 ERA in 40 1/3 innings. He had 44 strikeouts to 10 walks. And again, that's the big theme for some of these guys that we look at, is like, how well can you limit walks and still strike out batters? And then Dylan Beck was, in our mind, a pretty clear-cut decision. Here's why: because he had 25 appearances, 5 starts. So we looked at it where to be qualified as a reliever, you need to have a certain amount of appearances and 5 or fewer starts. Yeah. So that way you don't fall in that in-between category as a starter reliever. But 25 appearances, just 5 starts. He still threw 81 innings in 20 relief appearances. So that's beyond impressive there. He had 68 strikeouts to 19 walks. And man, I mean, we could talk. He had 11 saves. He had a 9-2 record as a reliever. Think about that. So he was just nails for that Young Harris bullpen and starter. I mean, his last outing in the regional, he threw a complete game, 9 innings, in beating, I believe, UNC Pembroke, one of the most potent offenses in Division II baseball this past season, to then advance to play Catawba, ultimately falling to Catawba. But with that being said, still, nonetheless, very impressed with what he did. And also, we'll talk a little bit about guys who maybe have moved on. And this is one of the guys who has moved on, is he's signed a professional contract with the Lincoln Salt Dogs of the American Association. So if you want to go see him continue to play, he's in the American Association in professional baseball in one of those independent leagues. So really excited to see that. Sashin, again, another guy that was nails out of the bullpen virtually the entire season. I know he had one minor hiccup against Monterey Bay, I believe, in the regional, but outside of that, head coach Justin James of Point Loma said, hey, we need you, Sashin, he would get the job done.
Yeah, he was huge out of the back end when they played a lot of really close games, and to accumulate all those saves, he was huge for Point Loma and for a team to get back to the World Series. And then for Dylan Beck and for a young Harris team that was so successful all year long, 9 wins and 11 saves, you're helping your team account for 20 victories, man. I mean, that's just hard to deny. And obviously, he's not being denied a chance to continue to play baseball, like you pointed out. And I think that is awesome. Now let's continue to talk about other players on our first team, Robert. Let's go to the backstops, man, some of the more valuable guys on the field. And, well, the top catcher for us, Tripp Clark from Angelo State. I mean, he was an absolute standout in every sense of the word, man. I mean, he put together what was just an impressive campaign, but an impressive career wearing an Angelo State uniform in 65 games this year. He got on base 52% of the time, and he was a guy who nearly accounted for 100 hits. He really did everything you could have asked for and had over 90 runs driven. I mean, this was a really good group, the good catcher's room that we looked at, man. But Tripp Clark certainly earned his way onto the first team selection. He had an incredible season, and the offensive numbers certainly jumped out at the page. But you can't forget about how good he is at holding runners and catching runners from behind the plate as well. An excellent defender, and that's why we had him as our first team selection.
Yeah, I agree. Well, pretty clear cut. I mean, he was top 5 in the country in caught stealing rate, I believe at 38.8% exactly on that. And not only that, but he could really, literally do it all. So,
yeah,
again, hitting 428, he slugged 773. He had 25 doubles. He had 14 home runs. He had 92 RBI. Very impressive there. He had just as many walks as he did strikeouts, which as a hitter was also great, but he also was punked 27 times anyway to get on base. And last but not least, he had 28 stolen bases as well. So made it relatively easy for the national runner-up, Angelo State, to pick him as, you know, he continued to hit as well in the postseason. I mean, when you go look at some of the stats, he hit 371 in the postseason and OPS over 1,300, you know, since regional play. So I would say that's a guy that can hit no matter who the competition is.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a guy that you would expect to continue to play baseball and hopefully do it for a living. He was an absolute pleasure to watch. You mentioned it, 27 hit by pitches and 24 walks, and he struck out only 24 times. He had more stolen bases than strikeouts as well. I mean, could run, hit for power, defend. I mean, he did everything. And Tripp Clark, certainly one of the best in the game. And it was just a joy to continue to see how he helped lead Angelo State to the highest of highs over the last few seasons, man. He is certainly all-around catcher that is very valuable with what he can do on both ends of the spectrum. Let's move along and talk about some other players on the infield. And speaking of players and positions that can be incredibly valuable, let's go to the shortstop position and talk about a guy that, man, was there an individual more valuable to his team than Jack Hines was? Yeah, maybe there was. We had our National Player of the Year be Hayden Yachek for what he did on both ends. And, man, just overall, we'll get to him. But Jack Hines certainly had an argument in that department. One of the best players in the country. And out of Augustana, he did damage all year long, over 90 hits. He hit for power. He hit for an absolute .445 batting average. That was very impressive. And again, another guy who was well-rounded, did great in the field also. And Jack Hines out of Augustana, our first team shortstop.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple to say when you have 20-plus doubles, you have, or excuse me, not 20-plus doubles, 20-plus home runs, 89 RBI, you have an OPS over 1,300, makes for a guy that can be very successful. 17 stolen bases, a guy that really did it all for this Augustana team. They ultimately fell in the regional, but he was that key cog for that team all year long and contributed such a great part for this Augustana team in Jack Hines.
Yeah, he did. I mean, he got on base a ton. That's Going to be the name of the game, but he also took a lot of extra bases, like you said, another consistent factor that we continue to look at. Now you talk about, okay, what's this middle infield look like? And I think a guy that deserves quite a bit of love is a guy who got on base pretty much more than anybody. 58% of the time, Jonathan Logsdon found himself over at first base out of Albany State. He's our first team second baseman. That is a hell of a middle infielder. Jonathan Logsdon, somebody that played for Albany State and somebody that I believe deserves to get the attention that he is getting right now because of the way he played this year, man. I mean, it is hard to deny the numbers that he put up. They were absolutely jumping off the page this season.
Yeah, and I mean, part of it, you think, oh, he's playing in the SIAC, but there's still quality baseball there in the SIAC, and what he did was nothing short of quality. 34 walks, 19 hit by pitches, and he only struck out 16 times in 239 plate appearances. A guy that will put the ball in play and get on base, like you said. 582 on base percentage. That's unreal. That's the highest of all the All-Americans on this list. So makes for an easy case for a guy who plays a solid second base for those Golden Rams.
So we've got our middle infield. Now we'll go to the corners, looking at first and third. And man, at first base, we'll start with Darian McDowell, a guy that really needs to be on your short list, your Mount Rushmore, so to speak, of 2024 hitters in Division II baseball. It was just striking to watch what he did for this West Florida team. Willed themselves in the postseason to have a nice run, but also hitting 442 on the year and slugging above 900. Well, that made it a pretty easy selection for a guy that just tore the cover off the baseball all season long with a striking 27 home runs. Darian McDowell, man, one of the best in the game.
Yeah, and speaking of one of the best in the game, talk about the postseason run he had as well, especially in the regional. 5 of his 27 home runs came just in the regional. And so when you're facing better pitching, when you're facing teams like St. Leo and like a Luke Lashutka, and then you're facing Embry-Riddle a couple of times, you're facing conference foe Delta State, makes for a pretty easy case for a guy that had 27 home runs and hit the way that he did with his batting average at a very impressive 442. And of the guys on this list, second amongst first-team All-American guys with a 902 slugging. I mean, 16 home runs, 95 total hits, 27 home runs. He had 53 walks, 9 hit by pitches, and he only struck out 34 times in 280 plate appearances.
It was really insane to see what he was able to do. Obviously, the top of every team's scouting report, but he was still able to do damage. Nobody could throw in the zone to him all year long. And as we continue, we're going to go to the hot corner, and we're going to go to the Midwest region. We're going to look at the Flyers of Lewis University, and they had Mikey Kosen over at third base, hit about 400, get on base nearly 50% of the time as well. He had a fantastic season, kind of flew under the radar a little bit when we were looking at this, but man, his numbers were undeniable with double-digit doubles and home runs. He had a really, really nice season also, and first-team All-American at third base.
Yeah, you wouldn't think about that, Will, when they team success coincides with, player success. But Lewis, going into the final weekend, needed to win a few games and a couple other teams to lose just to get in the GLVC conference tournament. And I guarantee without Mikey Kosen, they would be nowhere near the GLVC conference tournament appearance that they did, where they ultimately finished third in that GLVC tournament. So really impressive there. But yeah, Mikey Kosen, 19 doubles, 16 home runs, 61 driven in. He had 34 walks to 34 strikeouts. Again, that key cog to keep those Lewis Flyers having that chance of getting into the GLVC tournament.
That's right. Now we're going to move on to the guys patrolling the outfield, and this was such a dynamic group. I mean, I don't even know where to start, so I'll just start naming them off. Carson Bowles, Brennan Van Brusseggen, EJ Cumbo, Jesse Velders, Robert Sherrar. I mean, you got Bowles and Van Brusseggen, who both had, and Velders, who all had double-digit stolen bases. all of these guys did damage with the bat in their hands, man, all hitting above nearly 400, and the bombs were there as well. This was a fantastic group of guys, and it was just an unreal group for outfielders in Division II baseball this season, and those are the guys we selected on our first team.
Yeah, I mean, Carson Bowles, rightly so. We posted when he had a walk-off against North Greenville, we posted, hey, the best hitter in D2 goes yard. And for most part of the season, in terms of average, he was the best hitter in Division II baseball. And he proved it here. Again, 475, OPS above 1,300, 236 plate appearances. He has 24 doubles, 15 home runs, 68 driven in. Brendan Van Bruseggen, part of that Central Missouri lineup that was unreal. I mean, shoot, Bruseggen was hitting in the lower third of the order most of the season. Got bumped up a little bit here and there, but yeah, he was in the lower third of the order, yet he still put up a 384, 477, 796 slash line. Really impressive there. 21 home runs, 69 driven in. He also had 21 stolen bases. E.J. Cumbo in his career, it's recently been announced that he is signing with the Lexington Legends of the Atlantic League. So he's going to continue his playing career, hitting 415, slug 729 for the national champion Spartans. 98 hits, the only guy in Division II baseball history to have 400 hits in a career. He had 17 home runs, 73 driven in. He only struck out 18 times in 261 plate appearances. Really impressive there. Jesse Velders of MSU Denver, as we go to the Rocky Mountain Athletic Conference for the next two guys, and Rob Sherrard, both guys who really turned on a little bit of power, not just with home run power, but doubles. Both hitters had 22 doubles exactly, and both hitters had 10 or more home runs. Velders with 57 driven in, 22 walks, 18 hit by pitches. He only struck out 13 times in 196 plate appearances. Really impressive there. Rob Sherrard had 276 appearances. And if you remember, Will, early on in the season, Sherrard struggled quite a bit. I mean, he had a batting average below 200 at one point in the season in the first month. Then he just turned it on and was vintage Rob Sherrard from 2023. 21 home runs, 83 driven in. Really impressive to see what he did there and why he's a selection for a first-team All-American in the outfield.
Oh, yeah. And, man, Velders, he kind of was just jumping off the page to me. Okay, 460 batting average and a 562 OBP, slugged 860, and then Sherrard, you bring up what he did, and you knew all the expectations that he had after the historic season that he put together, and then he follows it up with another one. Although it didn't start the way he wanted, it goes to show, hey, a month slump to start the year, you could certainly rebound from it, and he finishes above 400 after sitting at $1 something early in the year, and that's like a month in. It was pretty remarkable, the run and the stretch that he went on, man. If you eliminate that first month, he's certainly a National Player of the Year contender. Obviously, you can't do that if then stuff. But, man, he had what a great run for Colorado Mesa. And Colorado Mesa in general, he was the engine that kind of turned that team's program, turned that team's season around. They had a slow start as well, and they find themselves hosting another regional. So, and a big reason why was him. So that's our outfield. Now we continue on. We're going to look at our DH and utility guys. Adam Paniagua, a guy from Regis who he was doing something special before he went down, but to us, he did enough to be selected as a first-team All-American. And it was really just sad to see him go down because Regis had an unreal season, historic season for their standards and for what that program is continuing to be built upon. Adam Paniagua was a key cog for this offense and only was able to play in 38 games this year, but got on base 56% of the time. And you mentioned that it was a guy in Darian McDowell who was second in slugging on the All-Americans. Well, Adam Paniagua was first. He slugged .924. And then Hayden Yachek, our National Player of the Year. I mean, he did everything. He hit .468 this season. Pretty much enough said for those two guys, man.
Yeah, pretty much enough said. And with Paniagua under first-year head coach Pat Jolly, really impressed. And again, like you mentioned, just sad that he went down with the injury that he did. Cost him, who knows what would have happened if Regis had a healthy Adam Paniagua in the regionals. But still, nonetheless, he had 173 plate appearances. We felt that was enough to put him in the first-team All-American list with 17 home runs, 60 driven in, 26 walks to 24 strikeouts. Really impressive there as he kind of split time between DH and catcher at that position. But then in terms of utility, Hayden Yachek, again, a guy who was our National Player of the Year because, he hit and he pitched. 468 batting average. He slugged 827. He had an OPS nearly at 1,400, and he had 27 doubles. He had 16 home runs, 82 driven in, 43 walks to just 26 strikeouts at the plate. Then on the mound, he threw 56 innings and had a 3.54 ERA as well. So he could do it on both sides of the ball. Just a crucial part of that Saginaw Valley State offense and pitching staff, as they set quite a historic season. They hosted the Midwest Regional. They were the number 1 seed. They ultimately fell in the Supers, but with Adam Petrowicz being at the helm there, they did such a great job. And Hayden Yachek was that key cog behind it.
He was. I mean, it was so cool to talk with Saginaw Valley State coach Adam Petrowicz and talk about what this program has done. That was one of my most fun times getting to do things this year, is learning about his journey and talking about Hayden Yachek, another guy that we had the pleasure to speak with. And he did everything, man. He hit for average. He hit for power. Didn't have much swing and miss despite his big body. He swiped bags. And then when he played in the field, he played third, he played second. He was the first team all-conference starting pitcher as well. He threw a no-hitter. I mean, so he did everything that this team needed, and a big reason why Saginaw Valley had their best season in program history. So that is our first team All-Americans. Let's move along and let's go to our second team and start with the arms, Robert. When we look at this second team All-American list and we start with the pitchers, Jake Covey, Connor Wolf, Gage Gillott, Reese Fields, and Jack Nedro were the 5 starting pitchers. Again, they all stand out because they put together great statistics. They come from pretty strong conferences and a selection where we look at these guys. What stood out to you from this bunch?
I mean, shoot, there's the tough one of, do we leave a guy like Jake Covey off the first team All-American list? And it was really close. Just amazing what he did. 74 and a third innings, a 1.94 ERA, 89 strikeouts to 19 walks. He was the Pac West co-pitcher of the year with Dylan Miller, and then he was the West Region pitcher of the year as well. And he's a second team All-American here, and deservingly so in 74 and a third innings with that 1.94 ERA. I mean, he took Concordia Irvine to the Pac West title game in the tournament. Had they have won, they would have gotten a regional bid, but ultimately they fell. But they wouldn't have gotten nearly where they were without Covey, because without him, they wouldn't have beaten Point Loma the first time in that Pac West tournament. So very impressive there. Connor Wolf, again, we mentioned him earlier, a 4.05 ERA, 97 and 2/3 innings. He was the number 1 guy with a 12-0 record for Central Missouri. Big reason why they got to where they got to carry was having a guy like Connor Wolf take the mound. And yeah, you kind of think about it, a 4.05 ERA isn't really that bad when your team scores about 13 runs a game anyway. So, you're just, in some regard, you're playing to the score. So big points there. Gage Gillott, who was part of a no-hitter as well. He had a 2.44 ERA in 73 and 2/3 innings, 70 strikeouts to 18 walks. Really impressed there. He also did it well with the bat, but we brought him in for his pitching with that 2.44 ERA for Slippery Rock in the PSAC. And then before Jack Nedro, Reese Fields, again, the winningest Division II pitcher before his career ultimately ended this past season, 11-4 record. He has a 3.45 ERA, He had 93 strikeouts to 21 walks in 86 innings. Impressed there. Nedro, a big reason why Lee got to where they were, getting to the regionals. His one loss was against the eventual national champion, Tampa. So you can't really discredit him too much for losing one game, especially to that team. And having a 3.22 ERA in 78 and 2/3 innings, 84 strikeouts to 24 walks.
Oh yeah, that bunch was very impressive, obviously, but he had some huge names on here that we've seen for a while. Connor Wolf, the fronting what was a historic Mules team. Reese Fields has been doing it for a long time, and his name has kind of been synonymous with some of these types of selections. And yeah, man, Nedro was just he burst on the scene this year, and he was just must-see TV every single night. Like you said, Covey, one of the best of the country, and Gillott, man, in a conference that had so many great pitchers in the PSAC. I feel like at times Gillott was a guy people could forget about, but he was as good as it gets as well. And that is our 5 starting pitchers. Let's go to the relievers, guys, with some great stuff for some teams that went to the World Series. Caleb Huertas and Andrew Carson. Caleb Hewerts, and Andrew Carson. And both of those guys for Angelo State and Tampa respectively had great stuff. They pitched big for their team when they needed to. Carson had unreal numbers, and it shows you how good Tampa was. He's a second-team All-American. Feels like they didn't even really need him in the biggest spots of the year in the World Series, but he certainly was needed at times this year and put together what was an impressive ERA in the ones, and Hewerts was just a bulldog for this Angelo State team also.
Yeah, when you think about Hewerts, think about in the World Series against Central Missouri, one of the most prolific offenses in Division II baseball was he do throw 7 shutout innings with 10 strikeouts out of relief, and that was his longest appearance of his career, and he threw close to 100 pitches in that and was a big factor of that. Ultimately finished with an ERA above 2, but going into that final game in that national title game against Tampa, he did get the ball for his first start of the season. He did throw 5 innings, gave up a few earned runs. But prior to that, so in all of his relief appearances, he did have an ERA under 2. And what's not to like about a guy that has 69 strikeouts and 24 walks and just 51 innings of work for this Angelo State team. So big factor into having a guy like that to potentially repeat as national champions. Ultimately, they didn't do that, but they did finish as runner-ups. And having a guy like that is a key cog in there. Andrew Carson, again, we mentioned 14 appearances, 34 innings, a 106 ERA, 32 strikeouts to 11 walks. And he threw in the semifinal game to beat Catawba. He closed that out. But outside of that, there's some guys that maybe he did throw quite a bit, the former Michigan State transfer, I believe. He was still able to get the job done with that 106 ERA, and a big key cog why he is the second-team All-American with 5 saves as well. I should have mentioned that as well.
And he is somebody who has unreal stuff as well out of the bullpen. He can bring it, and obviously a lot of guys in that Tampa back end are guys that you want to talk about. Now let's move along to the backstops, Robert, and talk about our second-team catcher. It's Chase Heath from Central Missouri. Man, what a season he put together. He had some stretches where it seemed like nobody could get him out. All in all, finished with 378, 466, and 769 for his slash line. And it was just that right there tells you enough. Double-digit extra base hits in terms of doubles and home runs. He put together what was a fantastic season for Central Missouri, a big part of what was an offense loaded of guys who nearly set a new Division II home run record.
That's right. Well, and 16 home runs, 13 doubles. Anybody on this Central Missouri offense could hit, and Chase Heath was another guy on that list. And 193 plate appearances. Again, you mentioned that slash line, but man, 25 walks. He only struck out 15 times. A guy that'll put the ball in play or get on base via a walk for you is Chase Heath. So very impressed with what he did, and obviously we were very impressed. He was listed as a second-team All-American.
And now let's talk a little bit about the middle infield. You have Carson Ogilvie, who has been All-American by many publications this season and last season for a Lubbock Christian team that put together a historic campaign, a team that was able to go on a deep postseason, be so successful in the Lone Star Conference and just ultimately fall short in that South Central Super Regional. And then you also have Bennett McCollough at second base from Concordia St. Paul, a guy that perhaps you didn't know about as much from the second base position, playing in the NSIC, but he put together what was a fantastic season, hitting .424. And then for Carson Ogilvie, man, you talk about what he did. And, man, if you continue to talk about Lubbock Christian, and we can couple these guys together, that left side of the infield is a couple of chaps from LCU, Carson Ogilvie and Brevin McCool. But Ogilvie, man, .429 average, and he got on base .498 clip, and Bennett McCollough was a .511 clip. Both of those guys were fantastic in that middle infield for our second team.
Yeah, and with Carson Ogilvie too, again, part of what made him so successful is he hit 30 doubles, 30. And not only that, when he got on base and tried to steal, he was perfect, 25 for 25 in stolen base attempts. So a guy that can do it all, especially in the field as well. And OBP near 500, slug 758, really impressed with what he did. But yeah, Bennett McCollough kind of, like you mentioned with Coaston, flew a little bit under the radar, but for this CSP team, man, he could hit .411 OBP of 5 or .424. He hit .511 OBP, had a .696 slugging. He had 18 doubles. He had 10 home runs, drove in 53, had 25 walks. Man, I mean, this is a guy at the second base position in 51 games, 231 plate appearances, hit all year for these Golden Bears.
Yeah, it was hard to ignore him, man. He did a lot of really big damage at the plate, and he was a part of an offense and a part of a team that, kind of like Carson Ogilvie, had a couple of selections on the All-American list and 2 on the second team in particular, as we'll get to Nick Thimpson as well, an outfielder, and when we go to the outfield just in a moment. But let's talk about the corners now. David Lewis at first from North Greenville. He was really in that conversation as being one of the best players in all of Division II baseball a lot of the season. And he, from North Greenville, the reason why they were in our top 5 all year long with all the runs he drove in the first couple of months of the season. And then Brevin McCool, who, man, he was cooled over at the hot corner, but also he was very, very impressive and did a lot of damage at the plate for this LCU offense that was one of the best in the country when it came down to it in getting extra base hits. And those 2 guys are big reasons why. So that's our middle and our corners on our second team.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, Brevin McCool hit for the cycle in the postseason, and David Lewis at one point during the season was on pace to break the RBI record. Ultimately finished with 79, but still 24 home runs as well. But yeah, Brevin McCool in that South Central Regional hit for the cycle, and what he did was just beyond impressive as well throughout the entire season. 377 OBP of 460, slugs 409. He had 23 doubles. He had 79 driven in like Lewis as well. And neither of these guys were an easy out by any means, which is why they're big reasons why they're their second team selection here in the All-American list.
And now we'll go to the outfield. Colby Felix from Colorado Mesa. Huge season for him. You got another youngin, Camden Tanner, the freshman from Arkansas Monticello. You've got Carter Young from Central Missouri, Sean Barnett from Wingate, and Nick Thimpson from Concordia St. Paul. Those are our 5 outfielders. Camden Tanner really pops out at the page at you with what he did, but a couple underclassmen with Colby Felix and Camden Tanner on our second team outfield spots. The youngins did some work in the outfield, though, and certainly well-deserved.
Absolutely well-deserved, and we're excited about it. We're excited to talk about it. Colby Felix, when we talked to head coach Chris Hanks, really didn't play that much to begin the year, and opposite of Sherrar, who struggled to begin the year. Felix didn't really play that much to begin the year as he was nursing an injury, but nonetheless, he hit 414, slugged 931, which across all Americans list, that's the highest slugging percentage. He only had 151 plate appearances, but we still felt like he should be on this list. 15 home runs, 43 driven in. He had 7 stolen bases. Really impressed with how he played throughout the entire season once he did get that opportunity to play every day. Camden Tanner, you mentioned, freshman, hitting 421. And, man, he was such a big component of that team that made it to the Super Regional, ultimately falling to Central Missouri. But, man, without Camden Tanner, who knows where to be. Carter Young at the top of that Central Missouri lineup was a tough out all year. He hit 372. He had a slugging percentage of 700, OBP of 481. He had 24 doubles, 16 home runs, drove in 65. He also had 30 stolen bases as well. So a big part of that offense there. Sean Barnett of Wingate. He really turned it on there in the postseason as well, ultimately finishing with 26 home runs. And, man, Wingate may have not won the South Atlantic Conference tournament without Barnett being in that lineup. He had 349, slugged 739, and he had, again, those 27 home runs. 26, and he had 87 RBI. So really impressed there. Nick Timpson, another guy that maybe flew a little bit under the radar, but in one game this past season, he did have 4 home runs in one game, ultimately finishing with a 415 average, slug 713 at a 485 OBP, 81 total hits. He had 13 home runs, 60 driven in as well. So makes it for a very nice list for these 5 guys in the outfield.
Oh, yeah. And Sean Barnett, I would probably go out on a limb and say he had the best stretch in all of Division II baseball from one point in time to another to end the year. Because you go and look at Sean Barnett and how he finished the year. Okay, let's just bear with me. April 27th to the end of the year, which his last game played was May 18th, he hit a home run in every single game except 2. That spans 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 home runs during that stretch. It was very, very wild to witness how many home runs he was able to hit over the last few weeks of the season. And like you said, turning it on in a big way. I mean, you get like 11 home runs in your last 10, 11 games. It was just unreal how he finished the year.
It was. It really was. And like I said, without it, who knows where Wingate would be. They may not have even made a regional at that point because they were a team that was on the outside looking in terms of regional rankings, but they got the automatic in by winning the South Atlantic Conference tournament.
Yep, and he certainly had that strong finish to the year. That was very impressive. Let's go to utility and DH. Zach Schuler at the utility position for MSU Denver. Huge season for him. And then Austin Simpson, who in his career played a lot of DH. This year he was a first baseman, but a sneaky way to try to get this guy into our All-American list. And, well, why not? Out of the Great Lakes Valley Conference, he hit 414, and, well, he hit quite a bit of home runs as well. He had a fantastic season with 17 bombs and, 17 doubles as well, along with that 414 average. And then Schuler did it all as well. I mean, he had a ton of pop with 20 home runs.
Yeah, I mean, Austin Simpson, with what he did in the postseason in the GLVC tournament with that walk-off home run, to send Quincy to that title game. Had they won that title game, they would have gotten into the tournament, but they wouldn't have gotten there without that big home run from Simpson. And, man, he had such an incredible season. A guy that, is a big-bodied guy, but really got it done across all the offense. Again, 17 doubles, 17 home runs, drove in 56. He had 47 walks to just 35 strikeouts. A guy who saw the ball well, but another guy that saw the ball well was Zach Schuler. 20 home runs, 71 RBI, and he hit 364, had an OPP of 484, and slugged 795. 35 walks to 47 strikeouts, so he and Simpson were essentially flipped in terms of strikeouts and walks. But, playing in that RMAC, you can definitely get some thin air, and Zach Schuler was able to take advantage of that thin air with those 20 home runs.
Yeah, he was great. He tore the cover off the baseball. Both of them had a lot of extra base hits. Fun talking about all the best players in Division II baseball. As we move along, we'll tell you about our third team All-Americans, our final team that we made. Obviously, we threw around the ideas of honorable mentions, but hey, 3 teams is enough with all the guys that we put on. And the freshman teams kind of circulated as well. We did include a couple of the freshmen, but we continue and we go along and we talk about our third team. We start with the starters. Caleb Reyes, super impressive all year long. Maddox Long from start to finish was a bulldog for Harding. Zachary Murray, really, really big season for Young Harris. Aiden Layton, big for what Seton Hill did this year. And then Alex Canny, just another reason why this Tampa team wins the national title. They had a couple of All-American starters along with the guys in the back and guys all over the field. But those are our starters, Robert. Initial thoughts?
Yeah, and all these guys had an ERA below 3.5. All of these guys threw at least 6 innings per start. When you average it out with their innings pitch and appearances, I mean, you got, again, guys like Aiden Layton on the Seton Hill team with 3.15 ERA, 90 strikeouts to 20 walks. Really impressive there. Maddox Long, 107 strikeouts to 22 walks in 105 1/3 innings. You got Caleb Reyes, who had 60 strikeouts to 15 walks. You had Zach Murray, who had 99 strikeouts to 32 walks. And then same for Alex Canny, 99 strikeouts to 21 walks. All those guys over 100 innings. Caleb Reyes was at 77 1/3 and just 12 appearances. As for Cal Poly Pomona, again, all these guys, Caleb Reyes in particular, they knew they had a chance to win no matter who they were facing with Caleb Reyes on the mound. You could say that for all these 3 teams, but at least for these other teams, they had a good secondary pitcher as well. And Caleb Reyes being able to do what he did on the mound, knowing, he had that target on his back as the number 1 pitcher of his team, 8-1 record. Yeah, Max Long at 6-1, Layton at 7-2, Murray at 9-2, and Canny at 14-3. And really excited to see that those guys just perform the way they did all season long. I know Maddox Long was impressive to see him out there throw the ball at such a high level. Layton as well. I mean, all of these guys really, really impressive to see what they did all season long.
Yeah, and when you look at this, and we continue to move on to the pitchers, we go to the relief pitchers, and we talk about Will Horton from Arkansas Tech and Braden Sparaco from Southern Connecticut, a freshman making the list, and we'll tell you why here in a moment. But Arkansas Tech's the senior Will Horton, final season as a Wonder Boy, and it is a selection for the Fort Worth native joining Grant Shahan, who also was named an All-American by another publication. So this Arkansas Tech team, a team that had some of the most wins in the country against teams above 500. I believe they finished with the most, at least before the regionals, they had that. They do it with some great back-end guys. And, man, Will Horton was really impressive. He went 6-2 with a 1.90 ERA. Opponents hit about 200 off him, and that's why he's put up on our list. And then the freshman, Braden Sparaco, he got it done. We are looking at all the relievers in the country, said, hey, we can't leave this guy off either.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, when we looked at it, a 2.16 ERA, 41 2/3 innings, he had 51 strikeouts to just 7 walks. 18 appearances, so he would average roughly, give or take, 2 2/3 innings in appearance. And so to be able to put up what he did for those Southern Connecticut State Owls in the NE10 conference was impressive, and we obviously paid attention to that and felt like he should be on this list. So very, very excited to see that, and very excited that these two guys just performed the way they did all season and why they're on our third-team All-American list.
Exactly. And we continue to look at guys doing it with the bat. We'll talk about the catcher in this position. We're going to go to Troy Shields, somebody who put together just another massive season, really, Robert, when you think about it, when you look at it. He did all the things he needed to do. Him and Alex Schroeder was one of the most feared tandems in all of baseball, and he did great work.
Yeah, he sure did. And yeah, they were the only pair of teammates that had 75 plus RBI in the season. And yeah, they essentially played the same position, right? Catcher and DH. So excited to see that, and excited to see how well Troy Shields did behind the plate. He had a 366 batting average, 491 OBP, a 737 slugging. He had 20 home runs, 77 RBI, 32 walks. He struck out 43 times, but man, 234 plate appearances. Really impressed to see what he did this past season for the Oklahoma Baptist Bison.
Yeah, he was fun to watch, fun to learn about, fun to talk to also as that catcher. And as we look at and continue to think about guys that we're putting on our third team for the All-American list, you obviously had, when we look at the middle infield, Scott Anderson and Zach Saryeldon at the middle infield spots, both guys that really just were hard to ignore and big key cogs for their respective teams in the middle infield.
Yeah, Zach Saryeldon is one guy we'd like to highlight. On 150 plate appearances, he had 11 home runs, 49 driven in. He only struck out 15 times. He had 426, slugged nearly 800, a guy you shouldn't look over, and we definitely did, putting him on the third team. And Scott Anderson, what he's done the past few years at Point Loma, being just the bat that he is, hitting 392 this past season, 461 OBP, slugged 678 for the Sea Lions as they made their way back to Cary. He had 18 doubles, he had 15 home runs, 66 driven in. He walked 24 times. He was hit 10 times. A guy that really sets the standard, or a guy that, 10 years from now, you think, hey, who are some of the greatest Point Loma players you will ever see in your career, or you have ever seen? You think of a guy like Scott Anderson. So in terms of, historic players, in terms of Point Loma Nazarene history, Scott Anderson is definitely on that list, and he's on our list for third-team All-American.
He sure is. And speaking of third-team All-American, I want to apologize to Mr. Troy Shields. I know initially on our publication on Twitter, I had the wrong picture of him, and that is my fault. I think it was still Tripp Clark, didn't change it. However, when you look at it now, we've got our guy Troy up there correctly. So apologies on that front, but make no mistake about it. Like you talk about what Saryeldon did also, he just tore the cover off the baseball, was a very consistent fixture. And speaking of consistency, let's go to the corners and talk about Mackenzie Wainwright and Dylan Coleman. Mackenzie Wainwright, one of the most impressive, and we dubbed it the most impressive freshman in the country, man. His offensive numbers were off the charts.
Yeah, hitting 449, slugging 871, a 532 on base percentage. Hit a dozen doubles, 16 home runs, 63 driven in. He also stole 18 bases. What's equally impressive is in 193 plate appearances, he only struck out 17 times. So a tough guy to get out there. Dylan Coleman for the Statesman. Really impressed with how he played third base. He was a big proponent in Delta State getting to the conference title game in that Gulf South Conference tournament. Had a couple home runs in that tournament. Hit 398, slugged 697. He had 17 home runs, 58 driven in. He also had a dozen doubles for the Statesman, hitting in that middle of that order.
Yeah, and Delta State, they would not have got to where they got to without Dylan Coleman. And in the same respect, Mackenzie Wainwright really helped this Salem team grab more confidence as a program this season. Robert, they got better and they made strides as a group this year. And they did it with a freshman, Mackenzie Wainwright, leading that offense. Let's now go to the outfielders. Anthony Bocchio, one of the best batting averages in the country. Cody O'Connor, Evan Gilbert, and Dennis Pierce, along with Peyton McHargue, who had a ton of home runs. A lot to like about all of these outfielders for sure. And he had that great combination of power and speed in this group.
Yeah, and we'll highlight Bocchio. He had 17 stolen bases as part of that speed, but he did hit 400, slugged 587 with a 553 on-base percentage, a guy who got on base a ton for the Golden Ramps, and a big reason why they were the 1 seed and the PSAC tournament champions there in the Atlantic region as well. He only struck out 23 times in 223 plate appearances, and he walked 43 times and was hit 15 times. Then you got Cody O'Connor, who you'll see him and his teammate Joey Rezick, we'll mention briefly here in a second. But having those two guys in your lineup, O'Connor, 18 doubles, 19 home runs. He drove in 78. Really impressed with what he did. He had a 714 slugging. He had a few stolen bases, just 8 stolen bases, but a guy who could hit for a ton of power and prove that all season long. Evan Gilbert, a guy that burst onto the scene, in that William Jewell lineup. There was a stretch where he just couldn't stop hitting, and he was really impressive all season long, but a 728 slugging, 342 average. He had 16 doubles. He had 20 home runs, 88 driven in. Really impressed there. And he had 13 stolen bases. Dennis Pierce for Valdosta State, they wouldn't be as close to where they were without Pierce hitting 380. Had an OBP of 530, slugged 742. He had 11 doubles, 14 home runs. He drove in 68. He had 40 walks and 14 hit by pitches. And, he struck out only 20 times on the season and had 9 stolen bases. So he was a key cog in that Valdosta State order. And then Peyton McHargue, really impressed all season long for Washburn in the MIAA. 164 plate appearance. He had 17 doubles. He had 21 home runs, 67 RBI with a 354 average and a 743 slugging for McHargue. He had a couple stolen bases as well.
Yeah, he was huge, and he put together the season for Washburn that kind of put this offense on the map and really made some exciting MIAA series because of the way that he was able to continue to impress with the bat and hit all the home runs that he did. A lot of power from these third-team outfielders when you break it down, and I mean, that's a reason why you can find yourself on this list. I mean, we have 3 guys on this list, or 2 guys on this list, nearly 3, with 20 or more home runs from the outfield position, with Gilbert and McHargue and Cody O'Connor just 1 shy of it. So that was a big, impressive third-team outfield position with the Bombs for sure. Now we're going to continue to talk about our third team, and we're going to talk a little bit about the DH, Joey Rezick, like you brought up just a moment ago, and JP Gates, who did both, man. And he did it in the highest of stakes in the postseason, Robert.
Yeah, he sure did. I mean, a guy that didn't really throw that much come prior to the postseason, and then decided Joe Urso called on him heavily there in the postseason as he threw the final 4 innings to ultimately win that national championship game as well. But man, he could also do it on both sides of the ball. I mean, at one point in the postseason, JP Gates was hitting 800, and mind you, he played at least 5 games, and he still was able to hit 800. Absolutely unreal with what he did, and his ERA was below 1 the entire season as well, ultimately finishing with a .42 ERA in 21 2/3 innings, and he had 24 strikeouts with just 6 walks. Again, a guy who threw most of his innings, I believe 15 of them, just in the postseason. So impressive there. He also hit 423, slugged 714. He had 22 doubles, had 9 home runs and 53 RBI. But Joey Rezek is part of that UNCP lineup. Really impressed there. He hit 421, had an OBP of 521, slugged 853, 19 doubles, 22 home runs. He drove in 76, as both he and Cody O'Connor were another pair. So if I bump it up to 77 plus RBI, that's only Troy Shields and Alex Schroeder. But then if you go 75 or more, both O'Connor and Rezek did it as teammates as well. He walked 34 times. He struck out 35 times. A guy that could really do it all and was just a huge part. He and O'Connor both huge part of that UNCP team that won 40-plus games this season.
Yeah, and that tandem was a huge reason of that, just what was an unreal offense. And speaking of unreal, man, this has been an unreal time to talk about all of these All-Americans. We've talked about all our selections, why we did it, how we did it, and what we ultimately did. But before we go, just wanted to give a shout out to some players who narrowly missed the cut, and they had a ton of success. And this can kind of just be off the top, Robert, a little bit of guys that you think about. One guy that for me was really hard to leave off was Alex Epp from William Jewell. The shortstop position was just loaded, and you had a couple of studs there. You also think about Max Holdy in that same respect, and then those two guys were certainly very, very good and leaders on their individual teams from the Midwest and Central region, respectively. And man, when you look at their numbers, you're like, how do we leave these guys off? But hey, there's only so many spots. But wanted to give a special shout out to a couple of those guys.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, and a few guys I'd like to give a shout out to. Griffin Kern from Quincy, he threw the ball well all season long. Caleb Marks threw the ball well all season long. Charlie Cucciaro, Reginaldo Usin, some starters that it was hard to leave off the list. Joey Parliament for Trevecca, another guy that was hard to leave off the list. Jonathan Gonzalez from Colorado Mesa. Jorge Burgos at second base as well. Really hard to leave some of these guys off the list. Cam Pseudo from Lee, hard to leave off the list. It's hard to make some of these decisions, and unfortunately, there's a lot of great talent to go around. So, but we still want to highlight them and shout them out because we felt like they were still in the conversation to be on one of these All-American teams.
Oh, yeah. No, 100%. I mean, I even think about, you talk about Quincy, like they had some good offensive guys like Dustin DuPont. I mean, I know he was named on a couple of the All-American lists. Raleigh Hector from UT Tyler was a guy that it was hard to leave off. You talk about Lee, man. That Lee had some great guys. Brandon Daniels was really good. Ethan Kipple from Frostburg, man, it felt like he did everything for this group. And you talk about how Washburn was so good. You talk about a guy like Cash J as well, who did some amazing work. And I know you talk about starting pitchers in the Great Lakes Valley Conference. Another guy that we wrestled with, Jacob Krager, that was very, very, very good as well. But those are definitely some of the guys that were tough to leave off. I think the toughest one for me was probably Alex Epp. But overall, I think there were a lot of really close calls, obviously.
Yeah, there were a lot of really close calls. I know when we talk about relievers too, there's a few guys that was close on our list. Jake Cannett from Rockhurst, Alexis Cisneros from Central Oklahoma. Again, we want to shout those guys out. Nick Jennings from St. Leo, another guy that we thought, should have some consideration as well. But man, there is such a lot of good guys. A guy at Central Washington, Ben Lead, the GNAC Player of the Year. Another guy that we thought of, and it's like it is not easy to make this list, especially with the amount of talent in Division II baseball. And that's the goal of this, is to highlight all of this talent that we have here in Division II baseball.
Yeah. I mean, I even think of other guys like Henry Kusiak that we talked to earlier in the year, and Donovan Ford when we were going through the outfielders, man, that was running the gambit on it. But hey, that's how it ultimately goes. And I think that there's a lot of potential, a lot of opportunity, and a lot of excitement, Robert, when we think about Division II baseball and the future of Division II baseball, of who could maybe be some breakout stars for next season. A lot of these guys are candidates. However, a lot of these guys are moving on. They're graduating or they're moving on to different schools. But man, it was a lot of fun to break this down and shout some guys out, Robert. Really appreciate you guys tuning in to learn more about Division II baseball and the individuals involved.
Thanks for tuning in to the D2 Baseball Podcast. Don't forget to follow us on X and Instagram at DIVII Baseball as we follow the road to Cary, North Carolina all year long. Thanks for listening.